Do you ever feel like no matter what you do, it's never enough? Like there's an invisible weight on your shoulders, whispering that you should try harder, be better, do more, and still, it wouldn't be enough? What if that feeling didn't start in adulthood? What if it began in the silence of your childhood, in a house where love had conditions, and your worth was always measured against someone else's needs? Many people walk around with a quiet ache inside. They're high achievers, people pleasers, always trying to fix everything around them. On the outside, they seem strong, capable, resilient, but on the inside, they're exhausted, lost, always questioning themselves. And here's the part no one talks about. That feeling might come from growing up with a narcissistic parent. Yes, that word, narcissistic. It's often misunderstood. It's not just vanity or arrogance. It's a deep emotional wound that one generation passes to the next under the disguise of control, silence, guilt, or even good intentions. A narcissistic parent isn't always cruel with words. Sometimes the cruelty is in what they don't say, what they don't see, what they don't allow you to feel. Maybe you were the responsible one, the child who never asked for too much. Maybe you were always the strong one, even when all you wanted was someone to cuidar de você. Maybe every time you needed love, they made you feel guilty for wanting it. You weren't the child. You were the emotional caregiver. You were the audience for their pain. You were trained to disappear so que eles pudessem brilhar. And now, even as an adult, you still carry those silent rules. You apologize too much. You stay in relationships where you aren't seen. You feel selfish when you rest. You think love must always be earned. But let me ask you something. Who told you that you had to be perfect to be loved? Because the truth is, you were never the problem. You were just a child, learning how to survive in a home where your emotional needs were seen as threats, not truths. When you grow up with a narcissistic parent, love becomes confusing. It's no longer something you receive, it's something you chase. And the worst part? You don't even realize you're doing it. You choose friends, partners, and bosses that mirror the same patterns: conditional approval, emotional distance, manipulation disguised as care. And it's not your fault, it's familiar. It's what your nervous system understands as safe, even if it hurts. But there comes a moment, sometimes in a quiet breakdown, sometimes in a loud awakening, when you finally ask, why do I feel like I don't matter? And the answer echoes from the past. Because for a long time, you were taught that you didn't. This isn't about blame. This is about truth. You can't heal what you keep silencing. The child inside you is still waiting to be seen, heard, held. Not because you were useful, not because you fixed everything, but simply because you exist. You are allowed to break the cycle. You are allowed to feel anger. You are allowed to say, this wasn't okay. You are allowed to unlearn the lie that your value depends on your performance. Healing begins with truth. And the truth is, you were always enough. You just grew up in a place that didn't know how to tell you that. What is a narcissistic parent? To understand it through the lens of Virginia Satir, we must look beyond definitions. Satir didn't speak in cold diagnoses. She spoke in human experience, in stories that lived inside the soul. She believed that dysfunction in a family was never about labels. It was about patterns that silently shaped how a person learns to love, trust, and see themselves. A narcissistic parent, as Satir would describe without the clinical name, is someone who sees the child not as a separate being, but as an extension of themselves, an object to reflect back their worth, their success, their image. The child becomes a mirror, not a person. This parent doesn't say, who are you and how can I help you grow? They say, with words or without, how can you make me feel better about myself? It starts early. You draw a picture, proudly showing your scribbles. And the response? Why didn't you draw me thinner? Or maybe just silence, the kind that makes a child feel invisible. You bring home a good grade, and instead of I'm proud of you, you hear, that's what I expect from my child. You cry and they roll their eyes. You're so dramatic. You succeed and they say, that's because you have my genes. In the world of a narcissistic parent, there's very little room for the child to just be. Virginia Satir would say that a healthy family allows each person to stand upright, with dignity, self-worth, and voice. In a narcissistic household, however, there's one star on stage, and everyone else must play supporting roles, even the children. The narcissistic parent wears many masks. Some wear the mask of the martyr. After all I've done for you, this is how you treat me? Others wear the mask of perfection. We don't talk about that in this house. We are not like other people. Some play the hero in public, charming and adored by others, only to be cold and critical behind closed doors. But the child sees the truth, and even when they can't name it, They feel it. They learn to walk on eggshells, fearing unpredictable outbursts or silent punishments. They learn to read moods instead of listening to their own. They become experts in keeping peace, fixing tension, avoiding shame. Satir believed that the most dangerous wounds are the ones that go unseen. And what's more invisible than emotional starvation? The narcissistic parent may feed you, clothe you, send you to school, but they don't make space for your emotions. They don't validate your sadness. They don't celebrate your uniqueness. Instead, they mold you, sometimes harshly, sometimes sweetly, into the version of you that suits them. Maybe they made you the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the pride of the family. But that role comes with a heavy price. You had to be perfect, always perform, never complain. Or maybe you were the scapegoat, the one blamed for everything, criticized for even breathing wrong. Either way, you weren't seen for who you were. You were seen for the function you served. Virginia Satir said, "We must not allow other people's limited perceptions to define us." Zach, but how do you do that when your entire childhood was built on someone else's perception? A narcissistic parent cannot truly see their child, because to see the child fully would require the parent to step out of the center. And that they cannot do, because deep down, narcissism is not about power. It's about deep, unhealed insecurity. It's about someone who was never loved unconditionally trying to fill that void by controlling others. They don't say, "I need help." They say, "You disappointed me." They don't say, "I feel scared." They say, "Why are you making me look bad?" And so the child grows up learning that love must be earned, that peace is a performance, that their worth depends on how well they meet other people's needs. Virginia Satir spoke of the importance of congruence, when your inner world matches your outer behavior. In narcissistic homes, children learn the opposite. They learn to hide, to suppress, to please, because authenticity was punished, not celebrated. If you're nodding your head, maybe you recognize these patterns. Maybe you remember being the child who had to calm the parent, make them laugh, stay out of their way. Maybe you felt like your emotions were too much or never enough. This is not about blaming our parents. Satir never aimed to shame anyone. She believed that every person carries their own emotional inheritance, their own wounds, fears, defenses. Many narcissistic parents were once children who had to survive without love themselves. But acknowledging pain is not the same as blaming. It's the first step to healing. Because here's the truth. A child's job is not to heal the parent. A child's job is not to be perfect, silent, or impressive. A child's job is to grow, to feel, to explore who they are. And if that didn't happen for you, if you were the one carrying the weight of everyone else's emotions, you have every right to feel hurt, to feel grief, to feel confusion, but also to feel hope. Because now, as an adult, you can begin to rewrite that story. You can begin to see that the love you didn't receive wasn't your fault, that your worth isn't measured by how much you do for others, that you don't have to earn rest, that you don't have to shrink for someone else to shine. Virginia Satir believed in the power of human transformation. She saw that even the deepest wounds could become the roots of strength if met with truth and compassion. So if you grew up with a narcissistic parent, know this. You were not too sensitive. You were not selfish. You were not ungrateful. You were a child longing to be loved as you were, not as someone else needed you to be. And now you have the power to love yourself in a way that no one ever taught you. Not perfectly, but truthfully. Because healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about honoring the child who survived it and choosing day by day to become the adult they needed. Signs. You had an invisible childhood. Have you ever found yourself saying yes when everything inside you was screaming no? Do you feel anxious when someone seems upset with you, even if you did nothing wrong? Do you constantly feel like love is something you have to earn, like a prize at the end of a long, exhausting race? These aren't just personality traits. They're signs. Signs of something deeper, something rooted in a time when your emotional needs were ignored, minimized, or simply never welcomed. What you lived was an invisible childhood. An invisible childhood doesn't mean you were unloved. It means you were unseen. Your parents may have fed you, clothed you, and told the world what a good child you were. But inside the walls of your home, you didn't feel safe to just be. You were praised for being quiet, rewarded for not needing too much, told you were mature for your age, but no one asked what you needed. Let's talk about the first sign. You feel guilty for saying no. You may have learned early that your needs came second, or not at all. Maybe your no was met with anger, disappointment, or silence. Maybe you saw your parents explode when things didn't go their way, so you tried to keep the peace by always saying yes. Maybe you were punished for having boundaries, so you stopped having them. Now, as an adult, you say yes to invitations you don't want. You agree to help when you're exhausted. You apologize for things that aren't your fault. And worst of all, you feel bad for protecting your own energy. This guilt doesn't come from selfishness. It comes from conditioning. You were trained to believe that love was tied to compliance, that no meant rejection, that setting limits would cost you affection. But here's the truth. Saying no is not a betrayal. It's an act of self-respect, and you are allowed to choose yourself, even if no one taught you how. Let's go to the second sign. You feel like you have to earn love all the time. This one is deep. When you grow up in an invisible childhood, love doesn't feel safe. It feels conditional. You might have been told, "I love you," but only after you did something impressive, got good grades, cleaned the house, stayed quiet during chaos. The love was there, but it came with a price. So now you chase validation. You overgive. You try to be the best partner, the best friend, the best employee. You show up for everyone else, but struggle to show up for yourself. You fear that if you stop trying, you'll stop being loved. So you keep proving yourself over and over, hoping that one day it will finally be enough. But here's the painful truth. You're running a race that has no finish line, because the love you're chasing isn't in the present. It's the love you never received back then. Virginia Satir once said, "Feelings of worth can flourish only in an atmosphere where individual differences are appreciated, mistakes are tolerated, communication is open, and rules are flexible." If that wasn't your childhood, then of course your worth feels shaky. But that doesn't mean you're broken. It means your foundation was cracked, and now you have the power to rebuild it. And now the third sign. You live in fear of failing. When you grow up invisible, failure is dangerous because it was never just about making a mistake. It was about being seen as a disappointment, unworthy, too much, not enough. Maybe when you brought home a B+, your parent asked, "Why not an A?" Maybe when you cried, you were told to be strong. Maybe when you tried to speak up, they said, "Don't talk back." So you learned to perform instead of express, to perfect instead of explore, to succeed instead of feel. And now, as an adult, you carry a deep fear that if you mess up, if you fail, if you let someone down, they will finally see the truth that you were never good enough to begin with. This fear keeps you frozen, or it drives you into burnout. You procrastinate out of anxiety, or you overwork to prove yourself, and still, peace never comes. But here's the truth your inner child needs to hear. Failure is not proof that you're unlovable. It's proof that you're human. And being human is enough. So what do these signs really mean? They mean your childhood taught you to disappear, to blend in, to become useful instead of visible. They mean you lived in a home where emotional connection was missing, even if the lights were on and the fridge was full. They mean you learned to survive, but never to be. And now you have to unlearn. Unlearn the guilt, unlearn the hustle, unlearn the fear. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to say yes to be loved. You don't have to get everything right to deserve kindness. You are not invisible anymore. You were never meant to be. You are here, real, worthy, and allowed to take up space. And the healing begins not with a massive transformation, but with a whisper. I matter, just as I am. Let that be the start. How childhood emotional neglect shapes self-esteem and adult relationships. Self-esteem doesn't begin in adulthood. It doesn't magically appear after a promotion, a compliment, or a successful relationship. It begins much earlier, in the moments when we were first taught who we are, how much we matter, and what we must do to be loved. If you grew up in a home where your emotional needs were dismissed, minimized, or ignored, even without overt abuse, that neglect carved a silent message into your identity. I don't matter unless I perform, fix, or please. This message doesn't go away. It follows you. It becomes the lens through which you see yourself, your worth, and every relationship you enter as an adult. Let's start with how this shapes your self-esteem. When your feelings were never acknowledged, you learned that what you felt was either wrong, inconvenient, or unimportant. You stopped trusting your own emotions. You stopped believing in your own instincts. You began to doubt yourself constantly. As a child, you may have heard, "Stop crying, it's not a big deal." "You're too sensitive. There's nothing wrong. You're making it up." Each time someone invalidated your feelings, your inner voice got quieter. And now, that inner voice barely whispers. You rely on others to tell you who you are, how you're doing, and whether you're good enough. This becomes a breeding ground for low self-worth. You hesitate to speak up. You second-guess your choices. You overthink every word you say. You over-apologize. You constantly wonder if you're a burden, if you're too much, or if people are secretly annoyed by you. And because love once felt conditional, you now carry the belief that you have to earn your place in someone's life. Now let's talk about how this shapes your adult relationships. You may find yourself falling into one of two patterns. You choose emotionally unavailable or critical partners because they feel familiar. Or you become overly responsible in relationships, always managing, fixing, absorbing emotions that aren't yours. In both cases, you're not being met. You're performing a role, just like you did in childhood. You might be the one who gives endlessly, hoping someone will finally give back. Or you might avoid emotional closeness altogether, fearing that if someone sees the real you, they'll leave. This is how invisible wounds show up in visible ways. You struggle to receive love without guilt. You sabotage healthy relationships because they feel too good to be true. You tolerate disrespect because somewhere deep inside, you believe that's all you deserve. And here's the hardest part. You confuse control with connection. You confuse approval with affection. You confuse attention with love. Virginia Satir often said that the way we communicate with ourselves and others reflects the environment in which we were raised. If you grew up in a home where emotional honesty was punished or ignored, you learned to hide, to perform, to silence your truth just to feel safe. And as a result, you may now find it hard to be fully seen, even by people who love you. You may think, if they really knew me, they'd leave. So you stay small, you stay agreeable. You become what others need and forget who you are. But here's the truth. Your identity was shaped by a lack of reflection, and self-esteem can only grow in the presence of accurate mirrors. You need relationships that reflect your worth, not your utility. You need people who see your being, not just your doing. But before that can happen, you must become that mirror for yourself. You must begin to question the old beliefs. Why do I feel I'm too much? Why do I panic when someone is distant? Why do I feel like love is a transaction? And you must remind yourself again and again that your value is not based on how little you ask or how much you give. Healthy self-esteem is not arrogance. It's not perfection. It's simply knowing, I am allowed to exist as I am. I am allowed to take up space. I don't have to earn love by disappearing. And in relationships, it means saying, I want connection, not control. I want honesty, not performance. I want to be seen, not just needed. You are not here to be someone else's emotional caretaker. You are not here to constantly prove your worth. You are not broken. You were just shaped by a family that couldn't reflect your value back to you. But now you can start again. You can speak your needs without guilt. You can feel your feelings without shame. You can walk into relationships not as someone trying to be enough, but as someone who already is. This is the work, not loud, not flashy, but moment by moment, undoing the lie that you are only lovable when you're small, silent, or useful. Virginia Satir believed that change happens when a person finally decides to live from their authentic self, not their survival self. So if you're tired of relationships that drain you, if your self-esteem feels like it's built on sand, if you've lived your whole life chasing worth like it's just out of reach, then maybe this is your moment, not to fix yourself, but to finally meet yourself with the love you were always meant to receive. The pain of breaking free, guilt, fear, and invisible loyalty. Freedom is beautiful, but before it feels like freedom, it often feels like betrayal. This is the silent truth about healing from childhood emotional wounds, especially those born in homes where love was tangled in control, guilt, or emotional neglect. The moment you begin to choose yourself, truly choose yourself, something unexpected happens. Pain. Not the pain others caused you, but the pain of stepping away from the role you were taught to play. Because when you grow up in a home where your worth was measured by obedience, silence, or usefulness, claiming your own voice can feel like you're doing something wrong. Let's begin with guilt. Guilt shows up in healing more often than anyone talks about. Not because you've done anything bad, but because choosing a new path means leaving behind the version of you that kept everyone comfortable. You were the good child, the helpful one, the strong one, the fixer, the one who held the family together, often at your own expense. And when you begin to say, I can't keep doing this, guilt whispers, but who will hold it all together now? when you start setting boundaries. Guilt says, they'll think you're selfish. When you speak your truth, guilt warns, they won't love you anymore. This guilt is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign you're doing something new. It's the echo of old conditioning, from a time when love was earned, not given freely. Now let's talk about fear. The fear of losing connection, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of not belonging anymore. You might be terrified that your healing will upset the people you love. You might fear that stepping into your truth will create distance, and it might. But ask yourself this: is connection built on silence truly connection? Is being accepted for who you pretend to be the same as being loved for who you are? The fear is real, but it's not final. It's just a passage, a bridge you must cross between who you were told to be and who you actually are. And now comes the hardest part: invisible loyalty. This is the unseen thread that keeps so many people stuck. It's the part of you that feels responsible for your parents' happiness. It's the voice that says, they did their best. I have no right to feel this way. It's the ache in your chest when you think about walking away from old roles, old dynamics, old expectations. Invisible loyalty isn't conscious. It lives in the body. It's in the hesitation to speak up, the instinct to protect those who hurt you, the refusal to abandon the family, even when they abandoned parts of you long ago. Virginia Satir once said, "We must not allow the wounds of the past to continue to dictate the choices of the present." But invisible loyalty does just that. It makes you believe that being loyal to others means betraying yourself. So you stay quiet, you keep peace, you carry burdens that were never yours, and you call it love. But real love does not require self-abandonment. Real love does not demand silence. Real love does not punish you for growing. Here's the paradox. Healing will often make you feel like the bad guy. You will disappoint people. You will be called distant. You will be misunderstood. But that's not because you're doing harm. It's because you're breaking a system, a family dynamic, that survived by your silence. And systems don't like change, even broken ones. You will grieve. You will question yourself. You will wonder if it's easier to just go back. But every time you choose your truth, every time you say, "This isn't okay for me anymore," you are choosing life, not just for yourself, but for every generation that comes after. You are becoming the first one to say, "I don't have to shrink to be loved. I don't have to betray myself to stay connected. I can love others and still choose myself." This path is not glamorous. There are no instant rewards. There is just the slow, steady unfolding of a new identity, one that is not built on guilt, fear, or performance, but on truth. So if you're in this part of the journey, if you feel like healing is making everything harder, please know you are not going backward. You are not selfish. You are not ungrateful. You are breaking free. And freedom at first can feel like grief, but keep going. The pain of breaking free is real, but the peace that comes after, that's the kind of love your inner child has been waiting for all your life. Small steps toward healing. Recognize, validate, choose differently. Healing doesn't begin with a miracle. It begins with a pause, with a breath, with a whisper inside you that says, something isn't right, and maybe it never was. If you grew up in an emotionally neglectful or dysfunctional home, you probably spent most of your life surviving, trying to be enough, trying to keep the peace, trying to earn love, approval, and safety. But healing doesn't happen through trying harder. Healing begins when you stop and start listening to yourself. Let's begin with the first small but powerful step. Recognize. You can't heal what you haven't seen. Recognition is about gently, honestly naming the truth. What I went through was not okay. My emotional needs were not met. I was expected to be perfect, silent, strong when I was just a child. Maybe you've always minimized your experience. My parents weren't that bad. Other people had it worse. It was normal in our house. But normal doesn't mean healthy, and pain that goes unnamed doesn't go away. It just goes underground. Recognition is not about blame. It's about clarity. It's about standing still long enough to see the patterns that shaped your self-worth, your relationships, your voice. When you recognize those patterns, you begin to reclaim power, not to change the past, but to choose differently in the present. Which brings us to the next step: validate. If recognition is about seeing, validation is about believing. Believing that what you felt was real, that your sadness, your fear, your confusion, they mattered. They still do. So many people live with an inner critic that sounds like an old voice from childhood. You're overreacting. You're too sensitive. Stop being dramatic. That voice becomes the way you talk to yourself. You dismiss your emotions. You push through pain. You apologize for your needs. But healing asks for something radical. self-compassion. It says your story matters. It says you shouldn't have had to carry all that. It says you were doing your best with what you were given. Virginia Satir believed that the key to transformation was congruence, when our inner truth matches our outer expression. But many of us learned to be incongruent. We smiled when we were hurting. We said, "I'm fine," when we were breaking. We performed strength because weakness wasn't allowed. Validation is about telling yourself the truth and letting that truth be enough. No more minimizing, no more comparing pain, no more pretending it didn't matter, because it did, and it still does. And now, the most powerful step of all, choose differently. This is where healing becomes visible. It's in the moment you pause before saying yes and ask, do I really want this? It's in the moment you feel guilt rising and still set a boundary anyway. It's in the moment you feel the urge to please and choose to protect your peace instead. Choosing differently doesn't mean becoming someone else. It means becoming yourself, the version of you that was buried under roles, expectations, and survival strategies. You might still feel the pull to go back, to shrink, to fix, to earn. But with each small choice, you begin to send a new message to your nervous system. I am safe now. I don't have to perform to be loved. I can say no and still be worthy. I don't need to carry what's not mine. These choices don't have to be loud. They don't have to be perfect. They just have to be consistent. Choosing to rest without guilt. Choosing to cry without shame. Choosing to speak up, even with a trembling voice. Choosing to leave spaces where you're not seen. You don't have to fix your whole life overnight. You just have to start saying yes to yourself, one choice at a time. And maybe the most healing choice of all, letting go of who you were told to be and becoming who you actually are. Virginia Satir once wrote, "I am me. In all the world, there is no one else exactly like me. I have the right to exist. You have the right to take up space, to be messy, to grow slowly, to disappoint others if that means staying true to yourself." Healing is not a straight line. It's a spiral. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days you'll feel like you're back at the beginning. But each time you choose truth over guilt, compassion over criticism, authenticity over performance, you are rewriting your story. One step, one breath, one moment at a time. And in that slow, sacred process, you are coming home to yourself. Closing script, you are not their perception. There comes a point in every healing journey, a quiet, sacred turning point, when you realize something powerful. You are not the version of yourself that others created, not the image they projected, not the role they forced you to play, not the silence they demanded from your voice. You are you, and that is more than enough. But getting here isn't easy, because for so long, you were taught to measure yourself through someone else's eyes, to look for permission in their approval, to search for value in their praise, to define yourself by how little space you took up, how agreeable you were, how much you gave, without asking anything in return. Maybe you grew up in a home where love was conditional, where being quiet made you safe, where being helpful made you worthy, where your feelings were too much or invisible. And so, you adjusted. You dimmed your light. You suppressed your needs. You twisted yourself into whatever shape was needed to avoid rejection, to be seen, to feel something close to love. But here's the truth that no one told you. When you live by someone else's perception, you abandon yourself. You become a stranger to your own desires. You forget what joy feels like. You hesitate to speak your truth because you were taught that truth makes people leave, or worse, that your truth is wrong. This is why healing isn't just about letting go of pain. It's about reclaiming your perception of you, your voice, your story, your worth. Virginia Satir, a pioneer of family therapy and emotional transformation, once said, "We must not allow other people's limited perceptions to define us." Let those words sink in, because for many of us, the definition began early. You're too sensitive. You always make things difficult. You're not good enough. You're too needy. You're not like the others. And we believed it. We carried those labels like invisible weights on our backs. We made life choices based on what others thought we could or couldn't do. We stayed in roles, caregiver, overachiever, peacekeeper, emotional dumpster, because we didn't know we were allowed to be anything else. But now something has shifted. You're waking up. You're asking questions. You're starting to wonder, what if I was never broken, only misseen? What if the real me has been here all along, just waiting to be invited out of hiding? And that's where freedom begins. Not in changing your past, but in refusing to let it continue writing your future. Not in getting revenge, but in choosing peace. Not in proving your worth, but in knowing it. When you stop allowing other people's limited perceptions to define you, you start defining yourself from the inside out. You begin to set boundaries, not because you're cruel, but because you finally understand your value. You walk away from toxic relationships, not because you hate them, but because you love yourself. You make choices that feel aligned, even if they disappoint others, because you no longer betray your soul to keep the peace. You realize that healing isn't about fixing yourself. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And yes, it's painful. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it takes courage. But the reward is a life that feels like yours, a self that feels whole, a heart that feels safe, not because others finally changed, but because you did. You stopped believing the lie. You stopped shrinking to fit someone else's version of love. You stopped waiting for permission to be real. And now you are learning to live as yourself, raw, radiant, real. So, if you're still carrying the weight of someone else's perception, let this be your invitation to put it down. Let this be the day you whisper, I am no longer a reflection of your limits. I am the full expression of my truth. Because you are not too much. You are not too broken. You are not a burden. You are not a label. You are a soul learning to speak its own language again. You are a spirit reclaiming its space. You are a heart remembering what it means to belong, first to yourself. And no one gets to define that for you. So let Virginia Satir's words be your closing mantra. We must not allow other people's limited perceptions to define us. Not anymore. Not ever again. You are free now. Free to see yourself with eyes that honor, not diminish. Free to define yourself with truth, not fear. Free to rise as the person you were always meant to be, not the version others needed you to be. The journey is yours, and you are worthy of every step.